Hello and welcome. This video will touch on some ideas for what the boost and boost recharge mechanics could look like in the future. This is just one of many paths CIG can take, and I'd like to just quickly say that there may be better ideas out there. I recommend people use this as a starting point to discuss what they'd like to see. What we'll be looking at today is the effect a simple fix to the current boost recharge system would have on the game. To state it simply and quickly, I propose that boost recharge rate, which ostensibly occurs due to the presence of intakes, be based on speed. Basically, the faster you move forward, the faster fuel is collected by your intakes, and the more boost becomes available for use. But first, let's get some background. A while back, I was thinking about the boost system. Conceptually, it's a bit of a head-scratcher for me, as intakes just seem silly to me in open space. I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations and determined that, assuming that ship intakes collect hydrogen, which is by far the most common particle in open space, a ship with a 2x2 meter intake traveling at 200 meters per second would take 10 trillion years, yes, that's a 1 with 13 zeros, to collect the amount of hydrogen present in a single gallon of water. It seemed to me that no ship designer in their right mind would choose to add an intake rather than add a much lighter fuel tank that can carry way more hydrogen than the intake would ever be able to gather. For a while I wrestled with this blatant disregard for realism, even though I usually don't have trouble with suspension of disbelief, as with a completely realistic game we'd be playing in beyond visual range with unmanned drones. I suggested changing the boost system to a capacitor of extra available energy that recharges from the power plant over time. Others suggested reversing the boost meter and having an overheat mechanic instead. The same gameplay effect for the most part, but more believable. Eventually, I learned to just accept that the intakes and the boost mechanics were here to stay. Some suggested that the intakes collect a type of fuel that perhaps we can't detect, but is everywhere. Perhaps some kind of exotic matter or something. Let's call it Imaginarium. One would think that this would cause boost fuel to only recharge when the ship is moving forward. It doesn't currently, however, and that makes little sense. I've noticed this for a while and just thought, meh, that's silly, but fixing it won't change much. But after thinking about it, I've come to the conclusion that it could have some very interesting impacts on the game. First, let's examine what parameters would affect boost recharge rate if this inaccuracy were corrected. Obviously, boost would recharge at a rate proportional to speed, and not just speed in any direction, but forward speed specifically. When the ship is strafing sideways or backwards, Imaginarium won't really be going into the intakes, unless the intakes are pointed in a direction other than forward, so boost wouldn't recharge at all. When the ship is in a skid, meaning traveling some amount forward and some amount sideways, the intakes will collect a fraction of the fuel it would be if it were going directly forward, as some of the fuel would be impacting the side of the ship rather than going into the intake. The fraction will be a function of the angle of incidence of the ship's velocity vector from the ship's longitudinal axis. The higher the angle, the less fuel would be collected. Now we'll take a look at some of the possible gameplay effects of this. First off, prolonged sideward engagements, such as circle strafing, with no transitions to forward flight, will result in the ship running out of boost fuel, assuming that boost fuel was being used to maneuver. This is because strafing mostly sideways would not allow the ship to collect enough boost fuel to continue to maneuver in a tight orbit under the new, much driftier flight model. Players would be less encouraged to over-rotate past their velocity vector in a turn. Doing so would allow a pilot to bring his or her main engines to bear against his previous vector, but would also stop the regeneration of boost fuel. In my opinion, this would encourage pilots to fly forward in turning arcs back toward their enemy more often, as opposed to jousting. Players would also be encouraged to keep their forward speed high in general. Boost recharge could possibly allow a ship to attain a high enough speed, perhaps an afterburner, when boost recharge rate matches boost drain rate while using boost fuel for maneuvering. This would allow pilots to maintain higher turn rates, but only if they keep their velocity vector high and avoid over-rotating their TVI, which would increase their angle of incidence and consequently reduce boost recharge rate, causing boost fuel to be expended. If you are one of the players advocating for gameplay similar to what is seen in the Hornet commercial, this could be a way to achieve it. Cruise mode would have a justifiable lower reason for locking rotation rate to the ship's ability to shift its velocity vector. In the current system, the idea is that over-rotating past your vector is not allowed in coupled crews because of the increased risk of colliding with an object. Under this proposal, over-rotating your velocity vector would increase the angle of incidence, decrease the boost recharge rate, and consequently not allow for boosted maneuvering at cruise speed, increasing the chance of a collision. Of course, decoupled mode would allow the ship to rotate freely, but the ship would quickly drain boost as soon as any acceleration is inputted, as cruise mode automatically enables boost acceleration, though in the current PTU version, the boost does not drain. Overall, making this small adjustment would have a profound effect on gameplay. Players could choose to fly in a more atmospheric manner, meaning keeping the nose mostly aligned with the velocity vector, and reap a benefit for doing so. Players could also choose to fully utilize 6 degrees of freedom, pointing at their enemies as much as they please, and reap the benefits inherent in doing so, but at the expense of sustained maneuverability. The best part is that no silly lore IFCS tweaking is required to achieve this amount of varied gameplay, at least no more than what CIG has already implemented and is saying that they are sticking with. The intakes and boost mechanics already exist. Simply making the intakes only collect fuel in a manner that makes sense can make all this happen. I look forward to your suggestions in the comments.